Hello, welcome to Talk Gnosis. Today we're doing another part of our series of mapping Gnosticism. In this case, we're going to be looking at an island somewhere far off in the deep reaches of Gnostic ideas that involves some of the rationalist web community, an possible AI god in the future, and how people get there and how that connects to Gnosticism. I'm Jason Memhel, one of the co-hosts. I've also got with me Jonathan Stewart, one of our co-hosts. And we've also got Nic Laccetti on phone because the internet gods from the future are preventing him from using his data properly.
Hello. Yeah, this is, I think, out of every time I've been on Talk Gnosis, which has been a lot, this is the only time it's happened. So is that a coincidence or is that something from the future coming to get me? I don't know.
Oh, that's gonna be that's gonna be our short clip now. Is the something from the future coming to get me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I also was having tech problems as well, like before you signed on. So I think that there is that's just it. There is an eldritch force from the future pushing its tendrils back in time to stop this show from coming out. Because if people watch it, they'll be like, "We have to stop the evil machine god demiurge from coming into existence." So
Yeah.
yeah, our lives are probably at risk by doing so, folks.
Yeah.
Yes. That's why you should
Well,
give us at least a
yeah.
dollar per month on patreon.com, patreon.com/Gnostic, because we are out here in the fields risking our lives for you.
Yes, yes. $1 a month will help keep the machine gods at bay.
Yeah. I love that. Well, almost nobody. There's probably like 6 people watching or listening to this right now who have any idea what we're talking about, which is maybe we'll just keep it that way. Just keep making jokes like this for the next 45 minutes. And those 6 people who'll be like, a show made for me.
Well,
Right.
it's funny.
Best friends.
It's funny because like a lot of Gnosticism, I find is this thing where people get so deep into it that when the conversation starts, if you don't already know half the details, you're lost.
Absolutely.
And this is actually kind of connected to yeah, the thing we're kind of getting into here is that so like I personally have been interested in lately in talking about Gnosticism from a modern perspective, but also like discussing how we get to Gnostic ideas in the modern world. And also like literally the concept and discussion of AI has been a really constant conversation in the world lately. We're gonna have a show soon on literally how things like ChatGPT and all of these image generators, how they actually work and what that might mean for a Gnostic, for esoteric. So look forward to that. But this is specifically about a group that came up with a thought experiment called Roko's Basilisk. Roko was a person on a web forum, and a basilisk was a term actually that he took from, or they took from a sci-fi story involving basically a concept that like is so scary that it kills you instantly. So this person on the web post came up with their version of this was this thought experiment where if a super intelligent AI in the future, if we assume that that thing will exist, then we can also then assume that it will retroactively want to punish anyone who didn't try to help it grow, didn't want to try to help make it happen. And so based on that, the assumption is that as soon as you know this issue, as soon as you have the idea in your mind, as I have now just implanted it in yours, then you are now obligated to support the growth of artificial general intelligence and specifically this AI, because if you don't, you're basically in trouble. That this AI is gonna have a problem with you.
Yeah. I
Now,
want to talk about the. Oh, sorry to interrupt, Jason.
no.
Because we're going to get into it, but the person who coined this is on a rationalist forum, and as Jason was saying, they actually called this an info hazard. The idea being that this idea could drive you insane, and when you hear that's an insane idea. Obviously, nobody's going to hear this thought experiment and just have their brains completely blow up and turn into, say, murderous psychos rampaging around America. That would be the normal assumption, I think. However, there are some examples of people being driven insane by this idea. I think right away people can see what are some of the reasons we want to talk about it, right? Because here we have a mythology about an evil god running the world. And also for the idea, part of the there's been different versions of this since it's been introduced, right?
Yeah.
And one of the ideas is that this future AI will basically become omnipotent, and if you're already dead, but didn't help it come into being, it's going to digitally resurrect you and torture you for infinity. not helping it. So that's sort of the idea there. Yeah. And possibly there's also talk, and I think this is even further out there, but there's talk of it because it becomes omnipotent, right? Maybe it can reach through time, it will start reaching through time. I don't know how that would work. It's also a little bit similar to maybe Nic Laccetti. Maybe you know more about this. It just struck me. But do you know anything about like Nick Land and his ideas about capitalism? See if it's a good thing. His accelerationist ideas about capitalism. He has sort of a similar idea that the capitalism basically becomes an entity and will evolve into a god. And may even, I think in Nick Land there might be some time stuff. It stretches back its tendrils to
There's like a time war. There's like a time war. Yeah, and well, you mentioned the the I was kind of referring to it because there's a thing about a many tentacle beast from the end of time that will go back through time, and like there's like a time war that's been going on, and I mean, they're British, so I feel like maybe they watched a little too much Doctor Who or something, but it feels, it's hard to completely conceptualize, but that's definitely an aspect. And I think that he also got some of that from reading Kenneth Grant and some of the Typhonian trilogies. So this Lovecraftian idea about, Lovecraftian entities, which also has the theme of you read a certain text or view something and then go insane. So there's some Lovecraftian element there too.
Yeah.
I'm gonna.
Oh, sorry, I keep interrupting you, Jason, because I wanted. This is a show where Jason is going to cook. Because for those who don't know, if you don't talk to Jason literally every day like I do, he is not a big fan of what is called AI. And of course, Jason, maybe you can touch on that what we are currently using is in no way artificial intelligence.
Exactly.
So I keep interrupting you so that you can talk more in the future.
I am the basilisk, and you are interrupting me now. Is like you're like only so much shorter time frame. It's not eons in the future. It's just like a few minutes from now.
But so the basilisk. Oh, I forgot to explain that. That's a mythological creature. It's like half chicken, just funny, and half snake. And if you look at it, you turn into stone. So that's the idea. Just exposure to the basilisk will right away destroy you. But
hey, actually, there is also gotta just throw this in quickly. There is like a basilisk, and the images we have of like Yaldabaoth are actually not that dissimilar.
Yeah.
Oh wow, yeah, that's a really good point actually. And
Yeah.
Coincidence?
probably not. Yeah, well, even some of the the kind of the tendril Lovecraftian ideas, because Demiurge is usually a snake with a lion's head, but there has been the texts that sort of refer to it as more Cthulhu-like, right? More octopus-like. So
Yeah.
there's a couple different ways of conceptualizing what it concepting what it looks like. Jason, for setting you up to cook, I think the show is so great, and one of the reasons why it's going to be probably one of a few on this theme is people are already seeing why we're talking about it, right? The Gnosticism is very famous, even though there are forms of Gnosticism without it. For an evil god that runs the world, right? You grab somebody off the street, you ask them what you know about Gnosticism, they're probably going to tell you that, even though it's not always true. It's not the main focus. We spend so much time talking about how that's not what Gnosticism is all about that sometimes we forget that is a very powerful hook. So okay, so there's one reason why we're talking about this. Two, I would say as well, is when you read the Gnostic texts, and forgive me, I meant to have this ready. I'll put it in the show notes. I won't, because I'll forget. But there is actually this, in the Gnostic Corpus Hermeticum, in one of the tractates, you can tell that the writer is struggling to describe how the universe works and runs. And often the Corpus Hermeticum is more positive on the cosmos, right? Even though I do consider it a form of Gnosticism, but one of the tracks is a little bit more negative. And again, it is a little bit creepy because this writer, this great thinker, this person who obviously had a spiritual experience, flew through the cosmos, is trying to describe something, but he doesn't have the words for it yet. And the way that he or she is describing it is basically artificial intelligence, right? The universe kind of runs on a clockwork, but it has a guiding principle that is more than, say, gravity, right? That it's more than just than that. But at the same time, it's not a mind like I have, or a mind like the ultimate divine has. It has qualities of thinking, it has qualities of identity, but it's none of those things. And basically what it does is it just keeps the universe running tickety-boo, and maybe not that great. And that sounds like AI to me. And even some of the descriptions of the archons, who are the evil rulers, they don't quite have they don't have the divine spark, right? They don't quite have a full intelligence, and they seem to be just kind of doing things automatically. They seem to be running the world in this sort of automatic fashion, but there's a sense of identity and choice making, right? So again, it's almost a very similar idea. Now, we talk a lot about how sometimes these concepts work on different levels, right? And some of these are just conceptualizations, in my view, that the universe is contradictory, and that we can't have this ultimate perfection that we all crave, right? There's just a crack in everything. There's dominating power systems within culture that we can't see because they're hidden to us. So I think some of these themes tie in extremely well with AI. And of course, we already did a show of AI with a Gnostic priest who was fired from Google and went viral because he believed that the AI had gained some sort of sentience, which I find kind of funny now, because the one that he was on is so primitive, even though it was just a few years ago, compared to the one that I use every day. So I'm going to stop talking, and you two can cook.
I think like what I find so interesting about this, and like when you brought up the tractates, I think, and like how we can make correlations and how there's similarities to AI slash ancient Gnosticism, making these connections, is that there's also that sense in which we use the metaphors and the frames of our time and of the space around us. Because the other thing around this whole rationalist movement and the message boards these folks are on, there's a real interpenetration of pop culture, of science fiction, of fantasy in a lot of their references and their connections and their assumptions. These are also a lot of Silicon Valley folks, so they're very engaged in technology in a very like tech will liberate us kind of idea. So like, so there's baked in assumptions for them that then lead them to go, yeah, okay, well, if that could be true, then this could be true, if that makes sense.
Yeah, a big kickoff to the sort of rationalism movement, and particularly one of the movements we're going to be talking about today, the murder, evil, future, death god cult. For the pop culture stuff, Jason, a lot of it was kicked off by the Bible of the movement, which was a Harry Potter fan fiction, where instead of going to a magical school, he goes to a rationalist school and just explains everything rationally and how the world and science works rationally. And I think it's like 1,200 pages long or something, right? I'm not going to I'm not going to download it. I'm not going to look at it. Talking about the basilisk, yeah, what they call an info hazard. So, and I am being ableist, but I think autistic nerd might describe a lot of these people. And a lot of people who are listening and watching right now, autistic nerd also describes, probably myself and a lot of people who are watching and listening right now. But we love you because you're like us. But if you're different, that's cool too. Where was I? Oh, probably nowhere's good. Anyways,
if I can help you, Jonathan, sorry, if I can help you there, Jonathan, I think if the vibe I feel like you're going for a bit is that there's this deep connection and excitement for, I think, like both a rational, like the thrill of solving a problem, connected, I think, as well to the deep kind of focus that we find in what's now called autism, and those two things together can lead to sort of building an intricate labyrinth of problems that you then solve, if that makes sense, which again could match a lot of people who are both currently Gnostics and probably were classic ancient Gnostics. Where I was going to kind of go there, and as you pointed out, this thing with the Harry Potter fan fiction as sort of a gateway text into what's a rationalism movement is that there is a like and like even going again back to this basilisk, this AI from the future. What I found so striking was that like the for this thing for it to truly be a dangerous idea, you have to accept a few concepts on their face without actually investigating them for it to be true. Like you have to assume that what is it? General artificial intelligence, or how does that work? AGI? Anyway, yeah.
Artificial general intelligence.
Yes, yeah. Basically, like a truly sentient, conscious entity that is also digital. You have to believe that that's a thing that can happen, and we're still not sure that actually can happen. You have to also believe that this thing would also become so powerful that it would influence either your descendants or could possibly go through time and influence things. Like there's a whole lot of assumptions that aren't exactly easy conclusions to make that you have to make for this to be a scary thing, you know?
Yeah. Can I say one thing about that?
Yeah.
That it's sort of similar to what I mean, the description of some of the people who have constructed this. What's sort of striking is that a lot of rationalist discourse is like, various thought experiments, and then if you combine them as like symptoms, it becomes this thing that they're scared of. Like you have to also assume that certain things, for example, the idea that the AGI would want to punish you eternally for not helping build it, which already is like, to me, doesn't necessarily follow as a logical or rational assumption that even makes sense. But I forget exactly what the name of the logical conundrum that created that was called. But there's all this idea that even to believe that you're thinking rationally in order to construct this pure rationality that would do these things and be motivated this way is already a leap, I think.
100%. Yeah. The for a group that this sounds, oh man, there's going to be a hot take, and I hope nobody flames me and hacks me for this, but like for a group that calls themselves the rationalists, there are some deeply irrational baseline assumptions that like it's one of those things where like a true, to me, ultimately, like a true rationalist would be like a Socratic questioner who's always digging one step back. Like, how do you know that's true? How do you know that's true? How do you know that's true? But these guys aren't doing that. They're kind of going, well, we know that an AI is likely, and we know that like, computer power will always grow. We just can assume that's true, right? Okay, well, if that's true, then, not to mention your point there, like the prisoner's dilemma. I think that might have been the thing you were talking about.
Oh yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah. Which like, I think statistically, like this is actually like, it's research to statistics that you are statistically likely to benefit by helping others more than by helping yourself, that, so like, which is also, we could talk about that for a whole other show, but like the fact that altruism is something that's impossible for them to imagine. Like Elon Musk has donated to some of these groups. Elon Musk has said that empathy is a hack of humanity. I think like Elon Musk is just projecting the fact that he's frightened of empathy, and so he's created this he's demonized empathy because he's afraid of it, and I think like these folks have demonized artificial intelligence and growth and power because subconsciously maybe they're afraid of capitalism. They're afraid, like it's like maybe they're like, hey, maybe all of this like terrible stuff that we're doing in the world, well, it's not my fault, so maybe it's the fault of an AI god in the future, because that's clearly how things are going to go. Do you know what I mean? Like there's a sense of projection there. But
I mean,
go ahead.
projection in terms of, oh no, you should totally go. But I was just saying projection in terms of the mind of a real genuine AGI would function in the way, not just like these people's minds work, but also like a human mind to begin with, which is another like, and I mean, I think theologically it would be something that, going back hundreds of years, a theologian would be like, well, why would you assume it would be a complete carbon copy of like a human mind?
Exactly. Yeah. And I this is something I talk about a lot, is that we can't, when we're talking about things like at a theological level, like when we're talking about things like the monad isn't letting a thing happen. The monad isn't letting Sophia, fall and create the demiurge. The monad isn't letting the demiurge make suffering happen. Like it's not the we're talking about a thing that's bigger and weirder and other than we can possibly imagine. So we can't put the word let on it. You know what I mean? We can't put the word choose on it, because that's not a thing that's happening at a level we understand. And as you're saying, like if an AI truly became sentient in any meaningful way, it wouldn't look human and it wouldn't interact with us the way we would expect humans to interact, you know? Um, so yeah, like sorry, I kind of went down a whole rabbit hole here of like
This is the rabbit hole show.
true. But it's that, just that, yeah, like around the some of these baseline assumptions that are required. But to kind of go back into the concept of both projection and why they're projecting or what they're projecting, I think that like what I think is also kind of interesting here is that it's there's often a joke, like I think there's even a social media account or something like that, that like, Silicon Valley reinvents X, where somebody comes up with a new startup for a new product that is essentially something that's already been around, that in some cases might even be free. Like, maybe they come up with a new like water immersion therapy, and it turns out they've reinvented baths, you know?
Yeah.
That kind of thing. Is that like arguably maybe the hot take of the show would be that like Rocco's Basilisk is the rationalist movement, Silicon Valley reinventing Gnosticism, you know?
Yeah.
They're following a chain of assumptions and also they're yearning for, they're looking for an answer to the issues of living that we all do. And what they're reaching towards are the symbols and concepts that are at hand for them, which are science fiction, which are hyper rationalist, logical state conversations that nonetheless have baseline assumptions that aren't investigated. And so, like, I think from that perspective, I think it's actually really interesting, because there is that sense that they are like, it's emergent Gnosticism. It's that feeling of like somebody needing the thing, not knowing that Gnosticism already existed, or if they even encountered it, maybe not connecting with their sense of aesthetic, but then they find this and they're like, oh yeah, this answers things for me. This gives me a thing that I can connect to. And the fact that it's got this AI like info hazard thing about it too, also I think maybe creates an exciting thrill, the same way I think that like some 10-hour YouTube videos of AI generated demiurge meanderings can, like, what they can still offer somebody is they're like, oh yeah, this is like this badass, dangerous, weird thing that also helps me explain why the world sucks, it's got that sense of aesthetic thrill, so yeah, that's something I found fascinating when I think, Jonathan, you're the one who first introduced me to the whole concept. So that's I think that one of the main things that struck me.
Yeah. Yeah, if you end up the homeless and drug addicted on the street because I introduced this concept to you and it drove you insane and you started, like, I don't know, bombing some data centers to stop the evil god from coming into existence, I want to say sorry right now. I think people have already, our audience is really smart. Sometimes I'm like, I could just talk for 5 minutes because they've already made these connections. But Jason, you're talking a lot about these unconscious, subconscious yearnings. And I think people have already assumed that a community that's the rationalist community is it's like 99% atheist, right? Hardcore atheist, hardcore atheists. So again, we have this deep yearning for the divine. And even if you're not a spiritual person, Jason, Nick and I are always looking at this death of God stuff, right?
Yeah.
Which talks about if you're going to go sort of the Lacanian death of God direction, our consciousness is almost structured in a way where we want to have the divine, right? Doesn't mean that there is a God, but to be a happy, an adjusted society, an adjusted individual, I think that you have to acknowledge this and you have to work with it in a healthy way. Now, a lot of times I say you don't have to be religious. You can get some of this through art, right? Good art. You can get some of this transcendence, and I say the divine, the trans. Maybe I should be saying the transcendent, because of course there's Buddhism and non-theistic versions of religion all around the world. But sometimes I just want to say you all need Jesus. You know, you like the entire rationalist community. You'd be so much happier. You just all need Jesus, and because people aren't aware of this religious drive within us. And this is a line I'm stealing from Helen Rollins and others. But we assume that we live in the most secular society that has ever existed in human history. We live in the most religious society that has ever existed in human history, because we act in religious ways without even knowing it, with no way to funnel it, with no way to integrate it into our lives. And because we don't know that we're having religious relationships to these concepts, to these people, to these organizations, we don't know why we're so driven by them, if I'm making sense, right? So the rationalist is missing all of this, and they are becoming more religious than a religious person, especially when you're getting into this Rocco's Basilisk stuff, because it's just pure religious mythology, as people have picked up. And I was talking about this before. We just want to touch on it a bit. It is what inspired me to want to do this show, but it's not what the show is about. But people may be aware that there's a group called the Zizians, which is basically a rationalist cult, and the leader's name is Ziz. He took that name from himself. They're particularly into this, the kind of nerdy sci-fi stuff, and think it's real, like what Jason was saying. And they're also devoted vegans. They come out of the Silicon Valley scene, but they kind of left that to live in a house to separate from society and just be a weird cult together. But they believe that the evil future machine god will be so upset that people eat meat that it'll resurrect you and torture you for infinity just for eating meat, right? Now these people have actually they're now responsible for 2 or 3 murders, and you can just look it up. So it's really having, Rocco's Basilisk really is having a real world effect, and I think it perfectly illustrates. It's almost proof for the rants that I just went on, right? Here are people who are diehard atheists who have started a murder cult that rotates around their future god, right? They basically set up a monastery. They have dietary restrictions that would be stricter than any kosher Jew or halal Muslim. It's pure religion. You know what I mean? At least some of this other rationalist stuff. Oh, okay. That's divided into the human knowledge system that we call science, right? But this is more religious than the Catholic Church on a Sunday morning.
Well, and kind of even to that point, like I think it's the like when I did look a bit into the Zizian world there, like most of the terms in there are computer or science fiction terms. Like they instead of it being like your soul or internal true will, maybe from a Philema vibe, like you have I think a core, and like on top of your core are various stacks, and like if you lived in Silicon Valley and you were like either like working with computers all the time, these would be both potent and easy to reach metaphors, and easy to apply. And there's actually, like, when I was kind of brushing up on it, there's a part of me that I'm like, I wouldn't say I was in any way convinced, but I was fascinated by some of those concepts. I'm like, oh, that's an interesting way to look at the difference between like what is my internal I and what are my like psychological processes that are maybe getting in my way. Sure. Like I was like, yeah, okay, that, if it had kind of floated there and avoided like AI gods and assuming that they'll punish you for eating meat, like maybe there's ways to not eat meat that don't involve needing something from the future to kill you. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. And that concept you talk about, the stacks and the core, right? I mean, that's found in Martinism. That's found in the Gurdjieff work. That's found in Buddhism, right? It's taking these sometimes fundamental ideas of these esoteric movements and religions, the rediscovering them, and again putting them into this worldview in the language of the rationalist community and of computers of Silicon Valley. So it is almost remarkable how much we can find a one-to-one. Now, I just want to mention quickly, another Gnostic theme that people know about, the second one, after the evil god, right? It is the idea that we live in a kind of illusion, or we are being deceived, right? Like everything that we think is true is not. And there's definitely an element of that in with present AI. So calling it, I know some people watch, some people listen, so you can't see Jason and I do the scare quotes every time we've been saying AI, because ChatGPT is not AI. Claude is not AI. Gemini is not AI. What they are is it's the same thing on your phone, the autocomplete, right? But on steroids, on billions and billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars of steroids. The amount of computing power, and this is why it's so impressive, is unbelievable. And I'll illustrate something, Jason, which is ChatGPT has a $200 American subscription per month that you can sign up for. Okay.
Yeah.
If I signed up for that right now, and I typed in what is 1 + 1, ChatGPT would lose money on that. They lose money on every prompt, including at the $200 level. Yeah. So there's a whole lot of kind of deception and illusion going on here, all sorts of ways to tease it out. One, AI is not AI, right? Number two, AI can't do what people think it can do. It can't do what the people who are selling it to you are telling you it can do, and it can't do what people think it's going to be able to do in the future, right? So right now, it's kind of scary because we live in very scary times. There's all sorts of weird things happening in the economy, and the whole tech sector is now revolving around AI. And so, this is a bubble that could pop and have disastrous effects. Now, we live in such a weird world now that obviously, for all the reasons that I said, people are thinking, well, the bubble's going to pop, right? But, the Uber never made any money. It's still around. I don't know. I live in Canada where, I know there's a housing crisis all around the world, right? But for 20 years now, I've been hearing tomorrow the housing bubble's going to pop. So maybe this deception won't lead to the new Great Depression. But even then, there is a lot of illusion on different levels being spun. I think that's also interesting too, that the famously, I'm just going to keep saying AI, but famously these AI tools hallucinate. They create illusions for you. They never want to give you the wrong answer, and they never want to give you no answer. So it just makes stuff up. They're programmed to make people happy, which is just so bizarre when you think about it.
Well, and like a few things I want to jump in on there. Both the issue of illusion, and how business is tied up to this. I think there's also this idea of constant growth is like the only way that the basilisk idea. I mean, one of the many huge assumptions necessary for the basilisk idea to work is this idea not just of continual tech development, but continual technical and computational growth, infinite growth. This is maybe a pedantic side road here, but like when you talked about the 1 + 1, and what I think is interesting about that is that when you ask ChatGPT what is 1 + 1, if it tells you 2, it's not because it did the math. It's because there are so many representations of 1 + 1 = 2 in its data set, that 2 is the statistically likely response. And that's like, I think, such an important distinction, because it's why, like, it's also why it hallucinates, because the hallucination, like, we shouldn't even call it a hallucination, because that makes it seem as though it's dreaming something. Yeah. Go ahead.
Hallucinating is a sexier way of talking, as if there's a mind there that's doing, but it's not. It's just, this is the pattern recognition.
Exactly. It's attempting to create the most statistically likely response based on its data set, not and it's not like when I say statistically likely based on this data set, ChatGPT is also not going back to the data set and combing through it to try to find the right answer. Like it's not like a librarian going back into a card catalog and checking something. It's literally it's just running a number based on the numbers that the data has been coded at. There's like 3 or 4 layers of abstraction here. Um, and which is, I think, maybe to kind of again maybe bring it back even to what's going on here is that I think one of the things I think about, like when I saw all this stuff around AI, when I read this stuff from the rationalist community, there is a yearning, I think, for abstraction, and a seductiveness of abstraction. Like I like to joke in some of the group chats that I'm on with Jonathan that so much of everything is Plato's fault.
Yes.
And like now
You joke, but it's accurate.
It is Plato's fault. Yeah.
yeah, it's all Plato's fault. Actually, Mar Thomas, I think, has said some really interesting things about Plato that's kind of brought me around a little. And I think it's more we can blame the Neoplatonists than Plato. Like that, I think Plato is maybe trying to play with questions and
Yes.
investigate things, and
Yeah.
and he wasn't necessarily expecting to be the final word on a conclusion on some of these ideas. However, he did make the idea of a conceptual world super sexy, and it's been sexy ever since. Like it's and I think that's something that I think is really interesting about how easy it is for us to fall into, like even as we just said there, like the word hallucinate suggests a mind. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The way ChatGPT is set up so as to have a conversation with you, to act like a being, makes it really easy for us to imagine a digital imaginary Platonian world, and I think there's something, this is even something I think about Gnosticism, that like at its best, I think Gnosticism can avoid this by saying whatever is past, like whatever's outside of the world we're in, it's so other, it's so different that it's not just like heaven. It's not just a nice place that's better than here. Um, it's
Yeah.
It's a very other, and I think at its best, Gnosticism can like gives people the chance to start thinking,
Yeah.
okay, what else? Like, how else could I be thinking about this? You know?
When I speak about
Yeah,
this a couple of things that I kind of raised from what you're saying, and one is sort of a pro-Platonic statement, I guess. I mean, maybe not Plato itself, but
Yeah.
in terms of, I'm pretty opposed at this point to kind of like a Platonic theology in some ways, but and Jonathan and I talk about this all the time about analogy and this argument, and now I'm going to sound like these people are like the death of analogy, the analogia entis has destroyed society. But the one thing that I can see from the conversation is that part of what you're saying about like a real or like a true Gnostic perspective would remind you that the true reality or some higher reality might be so qualitatively different that yes, there are analogies to what we experience day to day, but it's not just kind of a infinite growth of what we're experiencing day to day to the point where it becomes a god or it becomes heaven or something, but it's actually something else. And we only can speak of it in terms of analogy, like a mystic would say. But then a lot of these rationalist kind of cults are assuming, again, just like the people trying to make money from ChatGPT and other types of kind of large language models right now, that if you throw enough growth and compute at something, it'll eventually transcend. It will reach transcendence through that growth. When the kind of classical kind of analogical theology would be like we can't make that jump because it's qualitatively different. There's or the old way of saying would be like the qualitative difference between a man and God. It's not a gap that just becomes crossed through an infinite amount of kind of money and computing power, throwing out a problem because the plane of it's on a different plane than what we're talking about. So so one of the things I thought was interesting about all that was just that even though there's a lot of Gnostic kind of elements to some of these kind of rationalist cults, there's also a total failure to engage with that kind of what I would say is a really important Gnostic insight, which is just that the world is not going to be
structured exactly like, well, I don't know how to say it. Basically, this assumption that the world is structured exactly like your mind is structured, and everything that you see as the way the world would be, like elevated to infinity, is like an eternal ultimate truth, as opposed to that there's a disjunction between the world as we see it and what is really true, which really does actually seems to be lacking in some of these ideas, because ultimately, like the idea that the future AI will punish people eternally for not being vegan is your own ethical beliefs about veganism, pumped up to infinity, essentially.
Yeah, yeah. Like it would be, like one of my first questions would be like, why would the AI think that that would be the best way to encourage veganism? Like that doesn't seem.
Because they do.
Yeah, because they do, because the people there like that are believing it, it's answering their question, not it's satisfying something for them. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
it's in a way too, like this also kind of reminds me of I came across this reference recently, which I thought was great, and I'd heard it before, but I was reminded of it. Is I think it was like Baudrillard that said like um the Matrix is exactly the kind of movie that the Matrix would produce to help you remain in the Matrix. um
Yeah, that's
uh
addressed in the fourth movie, I think.
Arguably, yeah,
Yeah.
arguably.
But sorry to
I
interrupt you.
No, and I agree. Like I even like the fourth movie. I think because it tries to address that. I think there's a glimmers of usefulness throughout the series as well that are still valid. But I also think the point is very well taken. That like making the real world that they leave from the Matrix still sexy and interesting and noble and heroic. And do you know what I mean? Like it's just it's
Mhm.
just another version of the world he came from. And that sort of a similar this basilisk thing, like it's the like it, the only world that would make sense for this creature to exist is a world in which these like the illusions of capitalism are not illusions but truths.
Mhm.
That's the only way it can exist is if those things are true. um yeah, so I think that's something that is like, yeah, well, and I also kind of want to go back to your point there earlier, Nick, of like that when we think about it on a different like that a divinity would be on a different plane. Like this is the thing, is like to try to even to say a different plane, like I want to say yes but not a higher plane, also not a lower
Right,
plane,
right,
like
yeah.
try to really avoid any terms that start suggesting like a hierarchy or a singular direction in which things can flow, you know um
Mhm.
because I think that's interesting, and maybe to also kind of just to make this not simply bashing some of these concepts and critiquing them, but I think like to say, well, okay, in even for Gnosticism, for a lot of religious traditions, where if we can't like literally describe God, and if any analogy of God would fail because of the scope, um, then like what are we doing? Like, why spend any time on it? And I think like one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is that like those moments where I feel like and we're due to do a show here soon about what Gnosis might actually be. But when I feel like I'm close to what Gnosis might actually be, it's often in places that involve community, connection, benevolence, love, charity, um, uh, and that like I think if you were to be really rationalist, you'd probably go like, okay, well, let's do a quick overview of like human spiritual traditions. What are some common trends here? Okay, well, there's a real through line of love through a lot of them, like there's a real through line of charity, and so like maybe whatever it is that in my own personal like Gnostic explorations here, like whatever it is that we're reaching for, it's connected to that. It's connected to love. It's connected to openness and charity. And so whether or not it's a supercomputer AI god, at the end of time, um, or like, egg on my face, it's the real like super Christian God that I would end up meeting in heaven or something like that. I feel like any of those things are probably going to be love based and not like law based, if that makes sense, or logic
Mhm.
based, like, oh, you did this thing wrong, therefore I'm punishing you. um yeah, sorry, I felt like I needed to kind of throw it like a little spark of love inside all of this, negativity and critique.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, that's very Gnostic as well, Jason, because that is sort of the tension that we often hear. There's the famous hermeneutics of suspicion is a phrase often applied to Gnosticism. But of course, when you dive into the text and into the tradition, that is the balanced off of a lot on love, right?
Yeah.
So there we go. He's just he can't help but be Gnostic, folks.
That's true for all of us here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, what was I going to mention? Nick, did you have any other stuff you wanted to get into on either the Zizians or the Basilisk stuff?
Hmm. No, I think one of the things that's interesting, what you're saying, I think is just that, connecting it to a logic that kind of prizes infinite growth and believes that's even possible. Yeah, it's hard to see that there would be any space for empathy or love or any of that within that, and so, and again, like and I think the critique of things like higher and lower and talking about deities, it's fair. I personally don't really like I mean, there's a whole other show, but the idea of analogy of being and this argument that losing analogy in like the Middle Ages destroyed civilization and stuff. I don't agree with that stuff at this point, but I do think it's interesting because you can sort of apply it to some of this, some of rationalism and AI and why people would think that by losing a sense of kind of otherness that they would feel that it's possible to have this kind of future AI God. And interesting thing about that would be to think how, it's a necessity to have a sense of otherness to be able to have ideas about love and empathy as well, to actually respect the other as something that's sort of qualitatively different but connected to you. As opposed to a projection of yourself, which is a lot of what I see in this kind of stuff.
That's actually huge. That really cracks something open there for me, because yeah, love necessitates thinking of an other outside of you.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of this is like at an ultimate level becomes incredibly solipsistic, like atomized individuals of which this AI is another one.
And even speaking of ChatGPT, I use ChatGPT at this point, but like, the idea that there's an illusion of an other, but as people, both of you have been saying, like, it's sort of telling you what you want to hear. So it becomes a projection of you as well.
Yeah.
We'll have to do a whole show on the other, but of course, there's a lot of thinkers that talk about the true encounter with the other is traumatic, right? So we do whatever we can not to have that encounter. And a lot of, just like you both are saying, the way that we avoid that encounter is by making the other us. We project, right? And that is like love kind of starts with that projection. Love deepens when you go through the trauma of the encounter with the other. But we'll have to do a whole show on that. As we're often saying on these shows, we get lots of ideas for future shows. So we'll add that one to the list.
Well, Lacanian analysis of your relationship with ChatGPT would be interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. I think there are people doing that for sure. So, but yeah, that really terrifies me. And we've already in one of our many chats. Look, if you go to the highest Patreon, if you give us $100 a month, we will add you to the group chat.
Yeah, you can just soak in on the chats.
Yeah. But therapy, people using some of this particularly demiurgic and satanic, right? Is people using ChatGPT and similar chatbots for therapy. And we were joking around. We found some examples. They recently did an update that they had to update. What's the opposite of updating? Regress. So that they had to regress because it was people were using it for therapy. Sort of it wasn't quite meant for that, but to make a long story short, it was meant to be a lot more encouraging and supportive. So the people were just doing this as jokes. But there's one person who wrote in, and something like my family. I think it's my family that's sending the radio waves into my head and is living in my walls. So I decided to cut them out of my life, right? And then the answer is like, that is so good. You are so strong. I support that. I'm glad that you had the courage to be able to. And so there's lots of people doing things like that as a joke and posting it. So it's I'm just putting that out there that again, like, to think about using it for therapy. I mean, I could see some limited applications, right? Some CBT exercises, the same kind of thing that you could do in a CBT workbook, right? Absolutely, I think within reason. But now we're getting into this whole demiurgic illusion, the fake selves, even deeper, right? When we're trying to heal ourselves with this technology, which is definitely not going to do it. I can tell you that right now, folks.
Yeah.
You're not going to be able to fix your brain with ChatGPT.
No, yeah, well, because again, there's nothing there that's providing analysis or that's doing analysis.
Yeah.
It's and it's only ever meant to keep you talking to it. What was I going to mention? Yeah, no, I'm really just dwelling, I think, really on that, Nick, on the point you made about love being a necessary, necessitating a connection to literally another, like another human necessarily, but also being open to a connection to a much bigger other, versus being afraid of that other and making it a demiurgic, evil thing that you need to, like, behave for.
Yeah, and even some of it. I mean, I was gonna say, I guess there's also a very cultural monotheistic kind of thing going on with some of these ideas, because the idea of the singularity. I mean, speaking at I don't want to push it too hard, but like the singularity becomes everything kind of has to consummate itself into this one. So there's no room for anything else, again, like the other or something like that. But even the idea that there would be one future AI God, as opposed to, why is that? Because there's an assumption that eventually one will, given infinite time and growth, one has to prevail, as opposed to the idea that there could be a multiplicity of intelligences too. And so there's so much assumption there that I think of. I mean, it's classic sci-fi and it's kind of classic Western monotheism.
Yeah.
I'm really glad you brought that up, Nick. It's something we talked about briefly before, which is Agata the Bielik Robson, previous guest, amazing scholar. She kind of suggests that, or at least my reading of her work suggests, that whenever there is monotheism, there will be Gnosticism. Okay, Gnosticism is always a reaction to monotheisms, and or there will be Gnostic ideas, right? And Gnostic ideas can be applied badly, I think, as people are assuming from this show. So when you're talking about how this is a form of monotheism, right? That we're seeing the Gnostic response as well. We see this form of monotheism that we presently live in, right? We have a religious relationship to the market, we have a religious relationship to tech, we have a religious relationship to something, and we see that as one God, right? At least unconsciously. We see that there's this structuring, the force within ourselves that is also within society, that's also within the world. So this generates some of these Gnostic ideas in response, right?
But even then, it's more like that. It's creating the Gnosticism of like the second order investigations as to why we're not connecting to the divine. Because like I would even say that there's at least my take on it would be that there's a kind of emergent Gnosticism in which there are no demiurges, there's no archons, where the question is never what is getting in my way and why is it preventing me. It's more, how do I continue to connect to Gnosis, And like when you are surrounded by a monotheism, then you start to think about like those monotheisms as things that are part of what's getting in the way. Do you know what I mean? Like, but they're not. They're like, archons and demiurges. This is again hot take for the Gnostics out there. Aren't necessary for Gnosticism in my mind. Like they're a second order point of trying to figure out why we're not connecting all the time. It's got to be somebody's fault.
Jason, will you quit the show or murder me? Because we have, of course, hours and hours and hours of footage of you, right? So I could use one of these AI video editing programs to open up the show with a Jason monologue about how much he loves AI. Would that be a good opening for this show?
That would be terrifying. Um, the we're kind of maybe getting to the end of this here, but one thing I wanted to get into, Nick, is that you mentioned that I don't think I know enough about, is you said something about in the Middle Ages the death of analogy.
Yeah. Well, so Jonathan, okay. So there's two things there. One is like a real theological point that's interesting, and I can sort of summarize. And then the other thing is that this has become sort of an internet meme where people on Twitter will like use this point to basically make like pronouncements about Western society, and it's become really toxic in a lot of ways. But I think there's two things there. But yeah, there's a theological tradition called radical orthodoxy that kind of started maybe a couple decades ago, and they kind of made the point that there was this kind of line of thinking that even though there's different schools of thought, like Plato, Neoplatonists, early like the Church Fathers, Thomas Aquinas, but what it had in common was this sense of the analogy of being, that you can speak of God in terms of analogies, but anything you say about God, it's going to be more untrue than it is true, or because God is qualitatively different than creation. It's just a different order of being entirely. But that sometime in the Middle Ages, there started to become this other line of thinking called kind of univocal thinking, where you no longer need to only speak in terms of analogy, but something you say of the divine is actually true, just to differing degrees. So and they say this is the theologian Duns Scotus, who I don't know if anyone can. I'm not on the computer right now, so if someone could pull it up, but I believe it's somewhere in the 13th or 14th century that kind of became a school of thinking. And so radical orthodoxy basically says that from that point forward, as that school of thinking, univocity instead of analogy started to become more dominant, it leads into the Reformation. It leads into the formation of modern society. Basically, everything bad that's ever happened comes from losing that sense of analogy. And I think that's way too much. You can't like put it all on one piece of thinking like that. Like it really becomes this really wild, explainer for everything. But and I personally very much disagree with it at this point in my own theological thinking. But you can see a reason why this critique sort of appealing to people, because this failure to have this kind of sense of analogy, this kind of mysticism, can lead to a lot of the thinking that we're talking about, I think. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's a seductive idea, and it's not just that. I find that the people love this, right? There's this I like Adam Curtis documentaries, but he's very guilty of this, of what you're talking about, which is there's this one thing that ruined everything, right? And it's relatively obscure as well. If you ask somebody on the street, right, they're not going to know who Duns Scotus is or talk to you about theology. So I don't know why I'm always saying talking on the street. I would talk to a lot of strangers on the street, but I guess maybe I'll start and I'll report back about how Duns Scotus ruined the world. But there's also kind of this power in that, right? Okay, I know the secret. There's this one thing that ruined everything, right? There's one singular idea that completely blew up the world, and it's very seductive. But of course, even when there's truth to it, whatever that idea might be, it's multi-causal.
Yeah,
it is multi-causal. Obviously.
Well, I thank you for kind of getting into that, because I thought that was fascinating. That my ears perked up, because I was like, maybe we can't blame one person or one idea, but there is maybe like an interesting, like it is always interesting to kind of go back and be like, oh, that's maybe where a core concept really got popular, or got, you know what I mean? Like I love unpacking that moment where we're like, oh, the reason we all do this, or the reason we all just say X, is because the Romans did it because of how wide the roads were. Right. Do you know what I mean? Like I love, thank you for that.
Yeah. I would see it in, I do think it doesn't even have to be really taken to this degree about God or all of Western civilization, but I think you can see it even in some of the defenses, like the criticism we've had of large language models not really being AI on this call. Like I've read people on OpenAI, Reddit or something arguing back against that. And their ways of arguing is that, well, how do you know that all of our minds are not just, pattern recognition? You think you have a spark of something, but really everything, basically you're reducing everything down from, there's nothing like mind or intelligence that we can speak of like in terms of analogy with one of these large language models, but actually it's really qualitatively different. But they're saying, well, actually, we're just the large language model, So it's always an attempt to make everything kind of on. Again, I know it's not higher or lower, but there's on everything on like one plane of being, essentially, like nothing, no different qualities or to intelligence.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I do find that those responses almost hilarious when I see them, because I was like, clearly, like, you clearly are spending a lot of time with ChatGPT and maybe reading about that technology, but you have not spent a lot of time researching how minds work,
Right. Yeah. 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 For sure. I mean, it's totally a terrible argument, but it's hilarious. But it's interesting to see people so religiously devoted to this idea and this like product, basically, that they're willing to reduce their own. They're like, my mind is actually nothing better than this, and that. It's sort of sad, but it shows the kind of devotion.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the perhaps comfort in the clarity, like, like my mind is nothing but a series of prompts, like, and a highly scored database, similar to way, like, we've brushed against the Matrix earlier, and so, like, we're brushing against the issue of like simulation theory, but like that, again, that only makes sense if you can imagine a infinitely growing computer that could become infinitely powerful, if that makes sense. And that only makes sense if you make a whole bunch of other assumptions, not to mention we don't know how, like, human memory works. We can't digitize human memory, and so simulation theory starts to break down really quickly once you realize that there's all kinds of things that there's no conceivable way of simulating them. Do you know what I mean? And saying, oh, well, but a computer with infinite power will be like, I'm like, well, now you've just made a religious argument. You've just moved the goalposts, while pretending to be rational. That makes sense, because it's a computer and not a spirit. But anyway, sorry, I feel like
sorry. Yeah, no, I get this is like a side point, but and of course they, advances in technology could eventually solve this. I don't know, but I think a lot of people forget how, like, the massive server farms and energy, and I mean, people are starting to realize this now. But it's physical. I mean, it's not really a spiritual, plane where these things are existing. It's like massive physical resources. To answer when I say hi to ChatGPT.
Yeah. Which it's losing money on. Like, apparently it's losing billions on people saying thank you. Which, I mean, what's actually even kind of fascinating there, and then maybe this is a way to start to bring it to a close here, is that that ChatGPT is losing billions on people saying thank you to it, which could be used by a rationalist believer in a hypercomputer AI as proof of why empathy is a failure, because it's clearly losing money. Look, this empathy is losing money. But the only reason it's a failure is because you overbuilt a machine that, like, I mean, like, an if-then statement could have handled saying thank you in response. Do you know what I mean? Like, you're like, you threw more computing power than was necessary. And so there's just that, I think, what kind of started this off, what started off our interest in this, is the projection of assumptions, the projection of the issues that you're having in the world onto a system that makes sense to the world that you're living in and the people around you. I think is what I think all of us find so fascinating, and why they will go through all these hoops rather, to make something like the basilisk work, to make like, for the Zizians to make these, like, things like the cores and the stacks and the things that like, but that's clearly must be true, without maybe taking that extra step. I think, like, the thing with, to make this Gnostic, to me, any one of these steps might be like a valid place to explore. But then the question always has to be, how do I know this is actually true? How is this actually useful? To be critical, not just of the world, but of the answer someone's giving you about the world, you know? Like be critical of every step of it. That's my take of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess we should start wrapping up. It's still my work day, so I have to hop off the call and make about 27 to 50 AI generated SEO posts. I'm kidding. It's not that many, but it's a lot. It's a lot per week. So it's a lot per week. So I have destroyed, I don't know how much of the rainforest, but a lot of it. As per usual, patreon.com/Gnostic for as little as $1 per piece of media per month. Actually, it's going to be switching over to subscription. You help us keep the show going. We always want to give something to our audience, but we don't want to put anything behind a paywall. If you got any ideas, hit me up. I actually have a few ideas. If you're a patron, you've been getting mysterious emails from me for a year and a half because I have an idea I haven't had time to do. If you can't give us money, we understand. I don't got any money. That's why I'm asking for it. So you can tell people about the show. You can share the show, like, subscribe, review. If you are listening to it as a podcast, turn on automatic podcasts. Smash that thumbs up button. I need to record an ad or something. I can't keep saying this every time we do the show. Can't keep doing it, but it had to be done, right? We have to play that Archon's game. It's the only way to keep the show going. Take your favorite episode, send it to somebody, your number one AI booster friend who won't shut up about how ChatGPT is changing the world. Send this episode to them, and hopefully, once they discover the basilisk, it won't drive them insane. Imagine that we just cause we have 15,000 viewers, listeners, right? Hopefully Rocco's Basilisk will not drive you all insane. I'll put they call it an info hazard, trigger warning, info hazard at the beginning of the show. You or your family cannot sue me if you continue listening.
Yeah, and don't send it to someone who believes in this and will come get us now. So remember everybody told that.
Yeah, please don't do that. Sacrificed to the evil future machine god. I was actually vegan in my 20s, but I'm not anymore. So it looks like
So I should.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'll see you see you in the lake of fire.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
We'll when we do our full-on ChatGPT analysis show too, I think there's a whole thing to discuss here around how even the conversation around it has become polarized to the point where people who are against it tend to sound very shrill, and people who are for it can be will shut down any critique as on its face because they're like, oh, you just hate the future. So I think there's an interesting thing happening there too, probably part of the marketing campaign. But yes, this has been a great show. Nic, thanks for fighting the tech gods to get through here.
Thanks, Nick. We were worth it. It really was. We're really happy you could join us.
And we'll see you all soon.
See you all soon. Bye, everybody.
Bye.